Hello, good day, Tansei, Owen Pelche Nitsi Gasson. My name is Owen Pelche, and I am of Cree ancestry from Cowes First Nation, Treaty 4, Saskatchewan. I am also a full-time student at the First Nations University of Canada studying Indigenous social work. Today I'm going to be sharing a presentation with you about Jordan's Principle. I'm sure many of you have heard of Jordan's Principle but not really understand what it's about. I know I was like that myself. I had heard about it, but I didn't really understand or grasp what it was about. So I'm hoping I can clarify some of this for you today. For those who are interested, there is a documentary called The Messenger about Jordan River Anderson. It's by Alanis Obansawin. And this documentary really helps to shine light on what Jordan's principle is, who Jordan was, what happened, and why there's a principle in his name. So, with that being said, let's get into it. What is Jordan's principle? Jordan's principle is a child first principle named in memory of Jordan River Anderson. Jordan was a First Nations child from Norway House Cree Nation in Manitoba. Jordan was born with complex medical needs, and he spent more than 2 years unnecessarily in hospital while the province of Manitoba and the federal government argued over who should pay for his at-home care. When I watched the documentary, his dad had stated that it was such a rare syndrome that there's only been 8 cases ever reported in the whole history of humankind. That's how rare the syndrome was. And so Jordan ended up dying in hospital at the age of 5 years old, never having spent a day in a family home. Jordan could have been released to a medical care foster home if either the provincial or federal governments would decide who to pay for it. Instead, they both refused and they argued about it. So Jordan's principle was put into place to ensure a tragedy like this never happens again. Jordan's principle is a legal requirement that provides access to services for First Nations children in need and ensures that the government of first contact pays for the services without delay. So what had happened was that, there's a First Nations Indigenous child in care, and then they say, oh yeah, he can be released to a medical foster home for sure. But when it's time to release him, the province and the federal government both argued about it. They're like, no, I don't want, no, you pay, no, you pay. And so it was jurisdictional, bureaucratic policies and issues, and they just sloughed it off. Jordan could have been in a home with his family and enjoying life as much as he could have, but he wasn't given that. He wasn't afforded that opportunity because he was an Indigenous child, and nobody wanted to pay for that. So Jordan's principle was passed, this law was passed. Although Jordan's principle was passed unanimously in December 2007, First Nations children were still not able to access services under Jordan's principle until 2016. Why? Why would the government pass this law and then not fulfill it, not honor it, not own up to it? Well, it's the same thing that's been happening since colonization in Canada. It's systemic racism, discrimination, and oppressive social policies that have been designed to get rid of the Indian problem. As Duncan Campbell Scott had said, let's get rid of the Indian problem. So when they put social policies that are oppressive and they're racist and they're discriminative, that's always been the case since way back. So these processes are so slow moving, it takes forever to get through these, to start implementing them. So what happened was in 2016, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found the Canadian government, specifically Indigenous Services Canada, to be racially discriminating against 165,000 First Nations children and their families in its provision of the First Nations Child and Family Services Program, and by failing to implement the full scope of Jordan's principle. This ruling is known as 2016 CHRT 2, In this ruling, the tribunal ordered Canada to stop its discriminatory policies and practices, to reform the First Nations Child and Family Services Program, and to stop applying the narrow definition of Jordan's principle that it had been using. They want the full scope of Jordan's principle to be used. It's so unfortunate that the Human Rights Tribunal had to get involved and say, hey, Canada, you're discriminating. Stop that. On November 25th, 2020, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal released a ruling about Jordan's principle eligibility, because everybody wants to know who's eligible, who's not eligible, who's covered. Well, a child under the age of majority in their province or territory of residence can access Jordan's principle if they permanently reside in Canada and if the child meets one of the following criteria. One, is registered or eligible to be registered under the Indian Act. Two, has one parent or guardian who is registered or eligible to be registered under the Indian Act. Three, is recognized by their First Nation for the purposes of Jordan's principle. And four, is ordinarily living on reserve. Jordan's principle ensures First Nations children receive the services they need when they need them, not down the road or anything like that, like when they need them right now. I'm very grateful to say that Jordan's principle is now law. It's law in Canada. So in conclusion, I would like to say that I'm very grateful for having learned about Jordan's principle and how to utilize it. Simply fill out an application and send it in. Although the full implementation of Jordan's principle has yet to be seen and felt, I am hopeful that one day First Nations children will be able to access the services that all children in Canada can access. When I watched the documentary, someone had said, if healthcare in Canada is universal, why are Indigenous children excluded? It's the same thing. It's systemic racism, discrimination, and oppressive social policies. So how do we change these things? We educate ourselves. Through educating ourselves, through sharing the word, through researching, through fighting back and saying, hey, this is not right. Treat our children properly. This is how we can begin to help to enforce the full implementation of Jordan's principle. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope that it shone some light on Jordan's principle for those who don't know. And as I had mentioned, anybody who wants to learn more, research it. Just plug it into the Google, Jordan's principle, and watch The Messenger, the documentary by Jordan's principle. It's a really great documentary. I really enjoyed it, and I recommend it 2 thumbs up. So thank you for stopping by. Thank you for checking out my video, and please have yourself a great week. Thanks.